In this lesson, we're going to look at one-dimensional arrays. We will begin with an outline of a program which has all of the things included that we need and you've already seen before in this course. And these include the pound includes for the standard input and output in the standard library. The reason that we want to use this thing called an array is because in many instances we have applications where we need to store a large sequence or a list of numbers that are the same type that pertain to the same kind of thing. For example, if you are a student and you have, say, 12 homework grades, then we can make an array called homework and we can put all 12 grades in there. Otherwise, we would have to have a separate variable. So let's just look at an example of how we would do this without having an array. If we had homework grades, then we would have to declare a variable for each one, say an unsigned integer, and we would just have to name them, like grade 1, comma, grade 2, and so on. Okay, and let's just keep it at grade 5 to illustrate what's going on here. And then we would have to use a scanf to input the values for each grade, or we just have to use assignment statements to give them values, like grade 1 is equal to 78, and grade 2 would be equal to, say, 89, and grade 3 would be equal to 91, for example. Well, this is tedious, and if we get into a situation where we have a really large number of values that we need to maintain in our program, then the number of variables that we would have here would just grow enormously and would be very difficult to maintain. So we have a data structure in C that we can use that would be more efficient than using this approach. Now I'm just going to erase this because we're not going to use it, and let's add something that would be more efficient and make more sense. Now we would still declare this as the same type. So let's suppose we have an unsigned integer, and we could call this grades. But now instead of having a separate variable for each one, we can use a square bracket and a number within the square bracket, and then we can close it and put a semicolon here. Now this is called an array. So we have an array, it's called grades, and within this array we can put 10 values in there. Okay, so let's put a comment here, and let's say this declares an array of 10 unsigned integers that represent grades. Alright, so that's what we could use this data structure for. Alright, now let's see how we can put information into this array. Alright, well, there's some code that shows up here which we'll get to shortly. But first, to get going, let's look at how we could add some values into this array. Now, one way to do this would be just to use assignment statements again. So we could do grades sub 0 is equal to 78 semicolon. And the next one, grades sub 1, could be equal to 89. And grades 3, sorry, third grade, but index 2, could be equal to 91. Well, what these statements do are to put the numbers 78 into the first element of the array, which is indexed by the number 0. In computer science, whenever we're indexing through an array, the value 0 is a valid index. So the first element of any array that you declare, the first index will begin with 0. And because we have 10 elements, the last index then would be 9. So for 10 elements, the indices would go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. And just jumping ahead to show that, if we wanted to put a value into location number 9, we have grades index 9 would be equal to, then let's make that 95. Okay, so that's one way that we could get information into an array. But again, this is kind of tedious. It's almost the same as if we had individual variables once again, because we're spelling out each and every one of these grade values in a separate line. We can take advantage of the fact that this index is going to be an integer between 1 and 9, and we can use instead a loop to put grades into an array. So that's what we're going to do. So let's just erase this part because it's too slow and too tedious and it doesn't take advantage of the array. So let's erase that. And now let's go through with a loop, and let's begin by initializing all of the elements in the array to the value 0. Now we should do this anyway. Whenever you declare a variable, typically we assign it the value 0 because otherwise we do not know what its beginning value is going to be. So we can do the same thing with using a loop. To use a loop, we need an index. So let's declare an index for that. Let's do unsigned integer index, and let's set it equal to 0. So we'll use this index within a loop. Okay, so let's use a while loop. While index is less than 10. We want to stay in the loop. Okay, so let's put in a curly brace and a right curly brace, and let me fix the spelling for index. That didn't fix it. IN. Okay, so now we have index. So as long as index is less than 10, then we're going to continue to stay in the loop. Now, in order to fill up the array, let's write a line of code that would do that. So the name of our array is just called grades. Okay, so let's use a loop and let's ask ourselves or prompt ourselves to enter values for these grades. All right, so to do that, we just say, let's do a printf here. Okay, printf, enter grade, and let's use a %u, and then that will be all we'll need there. So let's do that. Enter grade %u \n double quote comma, and I'm going to print out the value for I for the index, but index starts with 0. So if I print out the value for index, then that will be 0. And as humans, we don't usually ask people to enter grade number 0. So to make that look better for someone who isn't familiar with programming, let's add 1 to index. So let's do index plus 1. Okay, so that's what we're going to output. So we're going to ask our user enter grade number 0 plus 1, which will be enter grade number 1. And then as we go through the loop, then we're going to prompt our user to enter grades 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. All right, now let's use a scanf to get the value. So we'll do a scanf, and we'll use the usual approach here, double quote, and we're reading into an unsigned integer array, so we need a %u. Okay, double quote, comma, and we specify a specific element within the grades array, the same as we do any other value. So we use an ampersand grades, but this time we're going to use the index. So we're going to do grades right bracket index, left bracket, and then right bracket, right paren, and semicolon. All right, so this will prompt us to enter the grades. All right, so let's clean it up a little bit and tab over. All right, so now this little loop. We're going to go through this loop, and we're going to enter values for the 10 grades that are going to go into the array. Okay, so I need to add 1 to the index counter. So let's do index plus plus right here. Right. Okay, so let's do that, and let's go ahead and right after this loop, let's print out those values too. Okay, so let's say print out the 10 homework grades. Right, so let me fix my spelling again. So we're going to print out the 10 homework grades, and we'll just use a little for loop for that. So let's do for. Okay, index is going to be equal to 0, semicolon, index less than 10, semicolon, index plus plus, and we'll just have a printf, okay, right paren, and let's do double quote, okay, grade %u is and another %u. So we're going to print out the grade number and the value for the grade. So we'll get the index and then the grade itself. And let's do a \n. We'll put them both on one line. And we want to print out the value for index, again adding 1, so we're outputting the numbers 1 through 10 instead of 0 through 9. So we'll print out index plus 1. And then we'll print out the value for the grade, which is the element within the array grades subindex. Okay, so then after that, let's just put a printf here so that we can skip down a couple of lines. Okay, double quote, \n, double quote, right paren, semicolon. Okay, so for the time being, let's also put a system pause right there so that we don't go any further with this. SYSTEM, right paren, double quote, pause, double quote, right paren, semicolon. All right, so now we are going to use this index, and we're just going to fill up the array with one number at a time, and we can do that just by using this small loop, whereas if we did this one line at a time, we'd need 10 lines here to put each value into the array. All right, so let's see if we can build our little program. The build is complete. Now let's run the program. So we have the window, which is prompting us now to enter grade number 1. Now we just have to go through and put some grades in here. So I'll just put some numbers between 1 and 100 in. So 89, okay, grade number 2, let's make that a 91. Grade number 3, okay, 95, and so on. So we'll just put some grades in. 78, 88, okay, 95. Number 7, let's put a 76. Grade number 8, let's do an 87. Grade number 9, let's make that 90. And now we're at the end of the loop, and we'll enter the last grade. So grade number 10, let's suppose we got a really good grade. We got 100 on that one. So now I'll hit enter, and we'll exit the while loop, and then we jump into the for loop, which is immediately below it, to print out the values. So we print back to the screen, grade 1 is 89, grade 2 is 91, and so on all the way down to grade 10 is 100. Right? So that's what our program is doing up to this point. Now, looking back at this, you can see that we used this loop, and we used the array with an index. So by using this index, we can shorten our program considerably, and we can just remember that this grades, this data type, contains 10 numbers, and the index of the first one is going to be 0, and the index of the last one will be 9. So this is the mechanics. This is how you would manipulate an array. So we're going to be using this extensively now. So in this case, we just had the loop. We entered one grade at a time, and then we print out the 10 homework grades here with just a simple for loop. Now inside the for loop, we also reference the array grades in the same way. We have the name, we have the brackets, and then we have the index that varies from 1 to 9. Okay, now let's continue with this. I'm going to just take away the system pause, so let's delete that. And now I've got a comment here that says print the array to see if all the elements are 0. Well, they're not. They have numbers in them as we just output. But let's see how we can initialize the array to zeros. So suppose we have finished with this particular problem, and we want to reuse the grades index for another student. Then we need to zero out all the elements in the array just to be safe before we proceed with inputting another 10 grades for another student. All right, so this says print out the array to see if all the elements are 0. All right, so we need to initialize that array to 0 before we can print those out. So we can use a similar for loop to do that, and we just would use for, just as we did earlier, index equals 0, index is less than 10, index plus plus, and we have parentheses, and then we can use the curly braces this time. So inside the for loop, we can just initialize each element of the array to 0. So we could do grades, bracket, index, right bracket, equals to 0. And that's all there is to it. So we're going to go through, we'll start with index 0. So grades sub 0 will be set to 0. Then we add 1 to the index, and then index sub grade sub 1 will be set to 0, all the way up to grade sub 9. Okay, so that will initialize the entire array to 0. Okay, now we are going to print out the array to see if they really are all 0. Okay, now this will be easy. This will be easy because we just printed out all of those grades up here. We have a loop. Index goes from 0 to 10, and we have a printf where we're just printing out the index and we're printing out the values stored at that index. So we can just copy that for loop there and we can paste it in down here. Okay, so let's put a little space between that. And I kind of like to have the curly braces around the print statement, so I'm going to add those in, even though we don't have to have them here. All right, so then we're just going to print out the array that now has been initialized to zeros. Okay, and then let's put a system pause here. So that we can stop before we finish our program by putting in 10 random numbers shortly. All right, so we'll do a system pause. All right, now let's go ahead and build the program. The build has succeeded. Let's run our program. Now, the first part of our program, we had to enter 10 grades, so we still have to go through that. So I'm going to put in some very simple grades. Let's say 90, 91, 92, and so on, 93. I guess I entered 91 twice, but that's okay. 94, okay, 85 or 88, 97, 98. Okay, so grade number 9, let's make that 99. And last grade, let's make that 100. So now I've entered the 10 grades as we did before. When I hit enter, then we go to the for loop and we print out the grades. Then we have moved down into our program where we have executed this loop, where we have initialized all of the elements in the array to 0. Okay, so you can see here that we, after we've initialized them to 0, then we just print them out with this for loop again. So here's the array initialized with 0. So you can see that grade 1 is 0 all the way through grade 10 is 0. All right, now let me point out again. We are printing out the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 because as a human we would expect that the first grade would have index 1 and the last one 10 if we have 10 grades. But internally in our program we know that the index will begin with 0 and it will terminate with 9. All right, so let's close this and go back to our program. So we initialized the entire array to zeros here. We printed them out here and we paused. So let's take away the system pause and let's go to another case, which will be the last one for this example, where we want to initialize this array to 10 random values using a random number generator. So this will be something very common that we're going to do as we continue. Okay, again, we can borrow some code that we have up above. Okay, so let's go up to the for loop where we initialized everything to 0. Okay, so let's just grab that for loop. So let's copy it. I'll use a Control-C. And then I'm going to put some space right there. Well, let's see. Let's put this above the comment that says print. All right, here's the spot. Initialize the array to 10 integer values, random number values. So here's where it should go. All right. So we have the for loop pasted in here. Let's align things. So we still have the index starting with 0, and it goes to 10. But instead of initializing their grades to 0, we'll just use a random number generator. So the random number generator is just rand, and with empty parentheses. And if we wanted to initialize this to some numbers between 0 and 100, then we would use modulus 100, and then let's add +1, which will give us a range of values from 1 to 100. Right, so that's what this is going to do. So within our grades index now, we're going to just have 10 random numbers that could represent grades all the way from 1 up to 100. Now, we want to print the array with the random numbers. Okay, so we can again borrow some code we just did. So we can scroll back up and we can get the print statement, the for loop that has the print statement in it for all the grades. So let's copy that and let's paste it down here where we have the comment. Here's the array with 10 random integer values, and we'll paste that in, and let's take care of the alignment. So now after we initialize the array with random numbers, then we will print them out here. Now in all of these cases we're just using the array called grades, and we're using the square brackets, and we're using an index where the index goes from 0 to 9. Okay, well this will complete this problem. So let's build it and run it and see what we get. So we'll build the solution. Okay, the build has completed. So we'll run the program for a third time. And we have to go through all the steps again. So we have to enter the grades. So I'll do enter grades 90, okay, 91, 92, and so on. Okay, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, and for the 10th grade, let's just make that one 99. Okay, so I'll hit enter. Okay, so now you see the output as before, where we have with the for loop, we printed out the grades, as you can see them here, 90 through 99. Then we go to the loop where we initialize the array. We overwrite the values with 0, so we set the entire array to 0, and we print that out. Okay, then we go into our random number generator. So here's the little loop where we use a random number generator to put the numbers in. So in this case, we get values for grades, which some are pretty bad. We have 42, 68, and so on. And this is output by the final print loop here, the for loop that prints out the values after we've initialized them with the random number generator. Okay, so in that case, you see we've just used the random number generator to put some numbers into the array, so we have 10 of them there. And then we're finished with this example. Okay, so this illustrates how we can use an array, and it can make our programming much shorter, and we can do things in a more efficient manner. So that concludes this introduction to one-dimensional arrays.